And they do seem to be trying some cool stuff with the Americanization of it. I think that we will hopefully never see, we were discussing again, the ring introductions that we had. Probably that was nearly as bad as 2005. You know?
Yes. So we've had that where we're trying to build feuds between drivers that aren't there. So there are issues with it as well.
And there's a lot of things to get to grips with, and for someone learning and coming into the sport, they're trying to understand the policies, and when you don't follow those policies, they're like, well, what's the point?
Hey guys, this is On Track GP. I'm Jamie Chambers, and today we are talking about the growth of the US in Formula One. So the first thing we're going to be discussing is, does the US have a bad background in Formula One?
I think it's an interesting one because they had a very strong background in the 80s. They used to have the championship finale in Caesars Palace car park in Las Vegas. Then, of course, when Detroit was booming, they used to have a race on the streets of Detroit, Watkins Glen. Then there was a period where it kind of died, and it came back with Indianapolis, obviously the most famous racetrack in the United States. Yep. And then 2005 happened.
2005, I think, you talk about recency bias, but I think this is sort of like the exact opposite, will live long in the memory. Having 6 cars line up on a racetrack in Formula One, which is the epitome of motorsport.
And honestly, it was just down to, at least in my opinion, sheer petulance from everybody. I mean, you know, okay, don't get me wrong, there's competition, but sometimes you need to look at the bigger picture. And I think there'll be people within management at Ferrari who are the big drivers of not allowing the chicane to be put in to slow the cars down. That probably, yes, they might have won that race, but they certainly didn't win the war.
That's certainly a huge example of, we're going to make a spectacle out of this, and for all the wrong reasons. And that, I think, has tainted a lot of Formula One's invested sort of interest in America as a whole. And I think it's only now starting to shift the other way.
Yeah, and I think they're doing it in the right way. They're using party locations, and you know, Miami, Austin, you know, which is not as well known, but is one of the most fun cities in the world.
So you keep telling us.
Good brisket, don't forget. And then obviously you've got Vegas coming up, but the Americans just do sport really well. I mean, you were at the NFL yesterday, right? And they just make it into such a show.
It's not about the sport. It's literally about it's an event. It's a concert, it's sport, it's everything. You've got cheerleaders constantly dancing. No matter what's going on, there's always something that you've got to be paying attention to. You can't go toilet, you can't go for a drink.
Matisse was sat there like this.
Either it's the halftime show, or there's a little game on the scoreboard and you've got to interact with that. Like, there's always something going on because there is so many stop and starts. So that was something that I found as well, where I was like, wow, this is like very heavily advertised, very heavily marketed. And obviously in Formula One, the American market is what they want to attack. There's too many people there, not take advantage.
I think making Formula One the overall experience that it should be with fan interaction is a massive part of it. I think the fan zone element it's becoming an Americanized format anyway.
And that's what we said. We spoke about it at length about the Silverstone event this year. It felt like a proper festival. It felt like there was so much going on. And honestly, I've said it before, but the British Grand Prix this year, I absolutely loved it. And they do seem to be trying some cool stuff with the Americanization of it. I think that we will hopefully never see, we were discussing again, the ring introductions that we had. Probably that was nearly as bad as 2005. You know?
Yes. The other point is that F1 will always follow the money, and America have got a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah.
So if they're forking out to have races there, okay, well, why not?
And big thing that we've spoken about earlier, Richard, it's a very good track.
It's an excellent track. Austin, they've done a fantastic job with Austin. I'm not the biggest fan of Miami. I think that Vegas is one of those where you can never really hope for a good layout of a circuit there.
That was never going to happen.
It's never going to happen.
7 mile long straight.
Just down the strip, yeah.
Just casinos either way.
It's not about the race, really, is it?
But you know, the Americans have the events are awesome. And what I used to race in IMSA, which is effectively the North American Sports Car Championship. I did that in 2016. And they used to have a rule where the gentleman driver or the amateur driver had to qualify the car. So I was always free during qualifying. What I used to do was take a scooter and actually just go around the infields of the circuit and go and meet people.
Amazing.
And just go and see what the atmosphere, because I'm a fan of motorsport as well. And the way Americans go racing, they just turn it into, we almost treat it a bit like a football match where we go, we rock up with our ticket, and then we watch the race and we go home.
Yeah.
They turn it into a proper event and full-on thing. They have the barbecues, they camp, you know,
in the
they
car
Pickup
park.
trucks
the car park,
everywhere.
exactly, the tailgating thing. And so I think there is, the way it's going is definitely positive, and I think that especially Drive to Survive is what seems to have been the catalyst for it. And I'm quite excited to see where it could go.
Well, that sort of brings me on to the next point. Liberty Media have sort of, we use the term Americanized. They've been a huge factor in how F1 is becoming more accessible and more of an experience-led thing. Drive to Survive is huge. I think it's a double-edged sword with dramatising Formula One to that extent.
Yeah.
We've had a few times where the drivers have come out and said, well, I just didn't say that.
Yeah.
Or I didn't say it in that context.
Yeah.
You know, so we've had that where we're trying to build feuds between drivers that aren't there. So there are issues with it as well.
There's an argument that that's a double-edged sword, though, because they've made it, Drive to Survive and Liberty have made Formula One seem so dramatic and so crazy, and they've got the fans into the sport.
It's just not like that.
There you go. They've got the fans into the sport, watching the races, and people are going, I thought they argued all the time. And they come out and they hug whatever happens after the race. Very rarely there's any drama. We don't see live in the races the drama radio things. I mean, quite often in Drive to Survive, you see them take radio from a race 6 months previously or something. So it doesn't. It's a double-edged sword for them. I think yes, they're getting people in, but I think at the same time, fans that want high drama will drop away from the sport because it's just not like that all the
We'll
time.
touch on this very lightly, but do you think that had a factor in Abu Dhabi 2021?
I think Abu Dhabi 2021 is going to be a really interesting thing, and I think there's a few people, if they write an autobiography, I'm going to be the first one buying it.
Yeah.
I think that's all I need to say about
Same.
that.
Well, Michael Massey is going to be a millionaire from the book alone, probably.
Billionaire, man.
I think that turned people away from Formula One. If they tried to,
100%.
which they did, they tried to dramatise it. They tried to let's go racing, right? They tried to make it into a spectacle when really it shouldn't have been. It should have been under the safety car.
And that's at the sacrifice of the rules, which is not okay.
Yeah, and that's not okay. But when people caught on to that, I think even people that were just getting into the sport, because there's a lot of rules and there's a lot of things to get to grips with. And for someone learning and coming into the sport, they're trying to understand the policies. And when you don't follow those policies, they're like, well, what's the point? Because now...
Exactly.
For the race director to essentially use his interpretation. Honestly, we're not going to dwell on this point because that's not the point of this. But in dramatising something that did not need it, it was already there. There was 1 point between the drivers. The race was run at that point. That it didn't need it. It didn't need to be Americanized in that way.
No, I mean, but you say Americanized. I mean, like, I'm a huge NASCAR fan, as we've spoken about. I love NASCAR. I think it's awesome. I try and watch every race. And, you know, NASCAR actually has some rules to try and spice up the racing. You know, you've got the overtime regulation, you've got the stage breaks and everything, the restarts, the full course yellows. And, but the one thing that you know NASCAR will always do is they will always follow their written rules to the nth degree. And okay, there's always a screw up, but not a screw up to that level. And so the Americanization has been done and very effectively in NASCAR, which is one of the reasons why it's so popular. But the way it was done in Abu Dhabi 21, I don't think that was an Americanization. I think I'm not a fan of what happened there at all.
I don't think anyone who is a Formula One purist can be.
And take nothing away from Max, and take nothing away from Red Bull, because they capitalised in the moment.
You
saying
have
if
to
it was the other way around, we'd be saying, you know,
100%.
It was one man or one team's terrible handling of events.
Yes.
Correct.
They completely messed it up so badly.
Let's peel it back to the US. We've got Miami, which I think is quite a fun Grand Prix. We've got Austin that we're going to see in a week's time. We've also got Vegas. Are we going to see the propagation of more Formula One races in the US?
I mean, I would like to see it. Because you know the thing which is cool about America is going to every city is almost like going to a different country. I mean, I've travelled America extensively and I love it. And you know, every time you go somewhere, you discover something completely new. And you can see something like, if it's successful, why not have a race in Chicago, say? Then NASCAR had a street race in Chicago this year even, which was a massive success. You know, there's been talks of the New York City Grand Prix. Well, they've got a Formula E race there.
That's literally what I was just about to bring up. Formula E, you're already in New York.
Exactly.
And that sort of style of circuit would lend itself to Formula One.
So there's been a lot of talks about it. Plus, there is a bit of history in New York through Watkins Glen, which is in upstate New York. They've also got one of the best circuits in the world, and many drivers have spoken about, Road America. Now, if they spend some money on Road America and brought it up to the modern safety standards, that would be a great place to have a race.
I think those would be better tracks than Qatar or the MotoGP ones, which are just not made for Formula 1.
Exactly.
So I'd rather we went racing there than in Qatar.
I mean, Road America's awesome. It's like the Spa of America, and every driver who races there in anything. They mentioned it in a Formula 1 press conference.
That's high praise to be the Spa of anywhere.
Exactly.
Really.
Yeah.
So they've got a lot of scope, and I think that I like the idea of having more races in America, especially more so than, as you say, the potential car parks or painted car parks that we're getting now from the Middle East. But what worries me is we still need to make sure that we keep the identity of the European circuits.
Hugely. I mean, we've seen the decline of Hockenheim, for example, which, growing up, my favourite race by a long way. I mean, it got sanitised and sanitised and sanitised to the point now that it's just lost in a forest somewhere. But we cannot get to a point where we just have American Grand Prix, Middle Eastern Grand Prix, and then
a few Asian ones.
We might go to Australia.
Even Lewis Hamilton keeps talking about having a Grand Prix in Africa. I'd love to see one in South Africa.
Yeah.
Kyalami, great circuit, fantastic circuit.
Nairobi's built for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a possibility.
So I want the sport to continue to be global, and that's always the danger. And it's not just in F1; it's boxing and it's football and it's
wrestling,
100%. Wrestling. Like you do go where the money is, and that's understandable. But you still need to make sure that you keep to.
If you only ever go where your money is, you will lose your foundation and your fan base. And I think if you were to ever to make it so global to the point that you take it away from ever racing at Silverstone again or ever racing at Monaco, you're going to put off your original foundation.
Yeah,
and I think what you say about the Africa one, I think that it might not be where the money is in terms of versus what the Middle East and everything, but the absolute positivity for Formula 1 to have a race at Kyalami or, as you say, Nairobi, that would be awesome. I think it would be really good. And they do have the facility. You know, Porsche bought Kyalami I think it was Porsche bought it a few years ago, completely refurbished it into a Grade 1 circuit. So there's a proper Grade 1 circuit about 20 minutes from Johannesburg, ready to go. And I think that, okay, if somebody said to me, would you rather have a street race in, say, Chicago, or would you rather have a race at Kyalami? I'd choose Kyalami.
Definitely.
100%.
I think that, again, and we're talking about the global aspects of the sport, that's where that would end up, and that would be really positive. Like, I think the deterrent would be if you're doing 5 races in any one continent, apart from obviously Europe being the fact that we've got multiple countries. If we're doing 5 in North America plus Canada, then you've got Brazil, then you've got Mexico. You're staying a lot in one place. Same with the Middle East. We've already got 3, and then we're talking about Istanbul. That make it 4. So if it's going to be global, it has to be fully global.
Yeah, 100%.
Agreed.
Not just global in hotspots. But speaking of expanding Formula 1, Andretti. FIA have said yes. It's now down to F1. What are our thoughts?
It should be the other way around.
It should be 100%. F1 should say yes, and then the FIA gets
That I was just about to say that, but anyway.
It's weird. Look, I think bring it on. Why not? I think it mix things up.
Awesome.
Let's do it.
And I'm sorry, but any of the excuses that they're saying that, they need to bring something to Formula 1, I'm sorry, it's Andretti. Andretti is a big name in motorsport, but the key is it's General Motors.
Yes.
And General Motors is one of the biggest car brands in the world, with everything they encompass. And they are potentially bigger than Daimler, which own Mercedes. So I'm sorry if you're saying that Andretti isn't bringing anything to the sport, therefore they don't need a piece of the part.
I think it would shake the other guys up as well.
100%.
I think, and that's good. Let's get
and
them quaking in their boots a bit.
We would all want more manufacturers in motorsport. And if this opens the floodgates with Audi, with
Porsche,
GM, exactly. If we can get them all into Formula 1, it's only going to be a good thing.
What the dream for me is not to have any carbon copies of any other bigger team. So if everybody on that grid had their own manufacturer, their own pathway to success, and they have to rely on their own technology, that would be fantastic. Because then you get more. I think you get more differences between the teams, but also
you've hit the nail on the head because that's huge. Ferrari only build Ferrari.
Yes.
Red Bull only build Red Bull, etc., etc. That will work massively, and that would be bringing something to the sport in and of itself.
Would anybody be a fan of having 2 different manufacturers for tyres? Because obviously we have Pirelli and then
Pirelli and Bridgestone for a
yeah,
while.
I don't know if it's allowed or legal, but
I think the FIA.
you're a
is
driver,
about-
maybe you would know.
I mean, I've raced in many categories with tyre wars, and honestly, I'm not a fan of tyre wars. You know, we have examples of, ironically, talking about America, the 2005 debacle at Indianapolis was caused by the tyre war, and the problem is with the tyre war is, if they haven't got it right, it's another variable which can take a really good entity out of the equation. So I think, and also once you get to tyre wars, you know, there's all sorts of things which get opened up, especially now. When there was a tyre war in Formula One last, there wasn't a testing ban. So the teams were testing to optimize the tyres constantly. So very rarely were there any issues with the tyres. If you go for a tyre war now, there's very likely to be tyre issues. So I think that keeping it as one tyre supplier would be the best.
And speaking of keeping it as one, IndyCar have a lot of Formula One drivers that go the other way. If we are to see Andretti come into Formula One, is it likely with drivers like Pato O'Ward that are already tied to McLaren, are we going to see drivers come the other way as well?
Well, you know, I'm pretty sure, speaking to some very good sources, that Colton Herta would be one of the drivers that comes over, one of their current drivers, and is very, very highly rated in IndyCar. And I think IndyCar drivers are massively underrated, especially at this stage. I think there was a lull in the level of IndyCar, but I think it's now extremely strong. And especially a lot of younger drivers coming through, as you say, O'Ward, Colton Herta, Alex Palou, obviously, McLaren are trying to get him, who they've now taken into court for 30 million.
Yikes.
A lot of court cases in Formula One.
So no, I think it'd be really exciting to see some of those come over.
Any other points, guys?
I mean, you've done a beautiful job of wrapping it up.
You have. I'm all for bringing things into the sport that add more jeopardy, add more interesting elements to it, that do not compromise the actual racing. That's how it is for me.
Bringing in stronger manufacturers can only lead to
100%.
better racing and more competition.
Yes.
Agreed, 100%.
Well, that has been our wrap up on Formula One and the US. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave any comments on what you think is the impact of Formula One on the US and the impact of the US on Formula One. Until next time, we've been on Track GP. Bye-bye. We've been Formula One.
We've been Formula... Yeah, we are.
We've been on Track GP. Bye-bye.